The dust swirled thick as molasses on the main street of Tombstone Creek, Arizona Territory, on that scorching July afternoon in 1882. The sun hung like a burning coin in the cloudless sky, casting long shadows from the wooden buildings that lined the town's single dirt road. In the distance, the sound of hammering echoed from the new silver mine, where men worked tirelessly to extract precious ore from the unforgiving earth. At the heart of the bustling frontier town stood the Silver Dollar Saloon, its batwing doors swinging gently in the desert breeze. Above the entrance, a hand-painted sign bore the establishment's name in bold red letters, weathered but still proud after 3 years of desert storms and blazing sun. Inside the saloon, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the sound of clinking glasses. Cowboys, miners, and traveling merchants filled the wooden tables, their voices creating a constant hum of conversation punctuated by occasional bursts of laughter. The piano in the corner played a lively tune, its notes dancing through the smoky atmosphere. Behind the polished oak bar stood Elena Rodriguez, known throughout the territory as the saloon queen of Tombstone Creek. At 28, she possessed a striking beauty that commanded attention the moment she entered any room. Her long, raven-black hair was swept up in an elegant style, held in place by silver combs that caught the lamplight. Her emerald green dress, imported all the way from San Francisco, hugged her figure perfectly, while her intelligent dark eyes missed nothing that happened in her establishment. Elena had built the Silver Dollar from nothing more than determination and a small inheritance from her late father, a Spanish rancher who had taught her that respect was earned, never given. She could handle a drunk cowboy with a gentle word or a firm hand, depending on what the situation required. More importantly, she could read people like an open book, a skill that had kept her alive and prosperous in a town where fortunes changed as quickly as the desert wind. "Another whiskey, Miss Elena?" asked Jake Morrison, a grizzled prospector whose weathered face told the story of 20 years searching for gold in the Arizona desert. "Of course, Jake," Elena replied with a warm smile, reaching for the bottle of finest Kentucky bourbon she kept behind the bar. "How's the claim treating you these days?" Jake's eyes lit up with the eternal hope of every gold seeker. "Found some promising color up in Devil's Canyon yesterday. Might be the big strike I've been waiting for." Elena poured his drink with practiced ease, knowing that Jake had been chasing that big strike for as long as she'd known him. Still, hope was often the only thing that kept men going in this harsh land, and she would never be the one to crush it. As she served other customers, Elena's attention was drawn to the batwing doors as they swung open with more force than usual. The afternoon sunlight created a silhouette of a tall figure, and for a moment, the entire saloon seemed to hold its breath. The man who entered was unlike any cowboy or drifter who typically frequented the Silver Dollar. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his black duster coat. His dark hair was longer than was fashionable, curling slightly at his collar, and his face bore the kind of rugged handsomeness that came from years of hard living under the desert sun. But it was his eyes that caught Elena's attention, steel-gray eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the room in a single glance. Most telling of all was the way he wore his gun. The Colt .45 Peacemaker hung low on his right hip in a well-oiled holster, tied down with a leather thong. This wasn't the casual carry of a cowboy or the practical wear of a merchant. This was the rig of a professional gunfighter. The stranger's boots made soft sounds on the wooden floor as he approached the bar, and Elena noticed how every conversation in the saloon had dropped to whispers. Men who dealt with danger every day in the mines and on cattle drives recognized a more dangerous predator when they saw one. "Whiskey," the stranger said simply, his voice carrying a slight Texas drawl that seemed to rumble from deep in his chest. Elena reached for her best bottle, studying the man's face as she poured. There was something familiar about him, though she was certain they'd never met. Perhaps it was the careful way he positioned himself at the bar, with his back to the wall and a clear view of both the front door and the stairs leading to the second floor. Or maybe it was the way his hand rested casually near his gun, ready but not threatening. "You're not from around here," Elena observed, sliding the glass across the polished bar top. The stranger's lips curved into what might have been a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Most folks aren't in a town like this." His answer was clever, neither confirming nor denying her observation. Elena found herself intrigued despite the obvious danger this man represented. In her experience, the most dangerous men often had the most interesting stories. "That'll be 2 bits, she said, naming the price for the drink. The stranger placed a silver dollar on the bar, far more than necessary. "Keep the change," he said, lifting the glass to his lips. As he drank, Elena caught sight of something that made her heart skip a beat. When the stranger raised his arm, his coat sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing a distinctive scar on his wrist, a crescent-shaped mark that looked like it had been made by a knife blade. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She knew that scar. She had seen it exactly once before, 7 years ago, on a night that had changed her life forever. The stranger must have noticed her reaction because his gray eyes sharpened, studying her face with the same intensity she had been watching him. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the bar, and Elena felt as if he could see straight through to her soul. "Is there something wrong, ma'am?" he asked quietly. Elena forced herself to breathe normally, drawing on years of experience hiding her true thoughts from customers. "Not at all," she replied smoothly. "It's just not often we get visitors who appreciate good whiskey." The stranger nodded slowly, though Elena could tell he wasn't entirely convinced by her explanation. He finished his drink in one smooth motion and set the empty glass on the bar. "Much obliged," he said, touching the brim of his black hat. "I'll likely be in town for a few days. This seems like a fine establishment." "We're open from noon until midnight," Elena replied, proud that her voice remained steady. "You'll always find a fair drink and an honest game here." The stranger nodded and turned to leave, his spurs chinking softly with each step. As he reached the batwing doors, he paused and looked back over his shoulder. His steel-gray eyes met Elena's dark ones across the crowded saloon. "The name's Cole," he said simply. "Cole Harrison." And then he was gone, leaving only the memory of his presence and the lingering scent of leather and gunpowder in the air. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she cleaned the empty glass, her mind racing with memories she had tried to bury. Cole Harrison. She had heard that name whispered in fearful tones throughout the territory. He was said to be one of the fastest guns in the Southwest, a man who had survived more duels than any reasonable person should attempt. But Elena knew something about Cole Harrison that no one else in Tombstone Creek could possibly know. 7 years ago, in a small town called Salvation Falls, she had saved his life. As the evening shadows grew longer and the Silver Dollar filled with its usual crowd of miners and cowboys, Elena's mind wandered back to that night in Salvation Falls, New Mexico territory in the spring of 1875. She had been just 21 then, working in her uncle's general store and dreaming of something more exciting than measuring out flour and selling ammunition to passing travelers. Salvation Falls was even smaller than Tombstone Creek, just a cluster of buildings around a water stop for the stagecoach line that ran between Albuquerque and Santa Fe. Elena remembered the storm that had blown in without warning, turning the dusty streets into rivers of mud. She had been closing the store when she heard the sound of hoofbeats splashing through the muck, coming fast and desperate. Through the rain-streaked window, she saw a rider slumped over his horse's neck, his dark coat soaked through and blood staining his shirt. The horse had stumbled to a stop right outside the store, and Elena hadn't hesitated. She had run out into the storm and helped the wounded stranger inside, not caring that her dress was ruined by the mud and rain. The man had been barely conscious, burning with fever from infection, and a knife wound across his wrist, the same crescent-shaped scar she had glimpsed today. Elena had used every bit of medical knowledge her grandmother had taught her, cleaning the wound with whiskey and stitching it closed with silk thread from the store's sewing supplies. For 3 days she had nursed him back to health, bringing him water and thin soup while he drifted in and out of consciousness. On the 4th day he had awakened fully for the first time, and Elena found herself looking into the same steel-gray eyes that had studied her across the Silver Dollar's bar. "You saved my life," he had said simply, his voice rough from fever. Elena had shrugged, embarrassed by his gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. But they both knew that wasn't true. In 1875, helping a stranger could be dangerous, especially when that stranger was clearly running from something. The man had worn his gun like a professional, and the quality of his horse and tack suggested he was no ordinary drifter. "What's your name?" Elena had asked. The stranger had hesitated, as if deciding whether to trust her with the truth. Finally he had answered, "Cole. Cole Harrison." Even then, Elena had heard whispers of that name. Cole Harrison, they said, was a gun for hire who had survived the Lincoln County War and countless other conflicts throughout the territory. Some claimed he was an outlaw, others insisted he worked for the law when it suited him. The truth, as Elena would learn, was far more complicated. On the morning of his recovery, Cole had tried to pay Elena for her care, but she had refused his money. Instead, she had asked for something far more valuable, his story. Cole had been surprisingly willing to share it, perhaps because he sensed in Elena a kindred spirit who understood what it meant to want something more than the life fate had dealt you. He had been born in Texas, the son of a small rancher who had lost everything to a combination of drought and cattle rustlers. At 17, Cole had strapped on his father's gun and set out to make his fortune. only to discover that in the post-Civil War Southwest, a man's reputation with a gun was often his most valuable possession. "I never wanted to be a killer," Cole had told Elena as she changed the bandage on his wrist. "But when you're fast with a gun, people keep giving you reasons to prove it." He had worked as a lawman in some towns, a hired gun in others, always trying to stay on the right side of the law but not always succeeding. The knife wound, he explained, had come from a fight in El Paso, where he had tried to stop a gang of rustlers from stealing a widow's cattle. He had succeeded, but barely, and had ridden hard for 3 days to stay ahead of the rustlers' friends who wanted revenge. "Why are you telling me this?" Elena had asked. Cole had studied her face for a long moment before answering. "Because you risked your life for a stranger, and that's something I've never forgotten. I figure if you're brave enough to do that, you're brave enough to hear the truth." On his final morning in Salvation Falls, Cole had made Elena a promise that had seemed both wonderful and impossible at the time. "Someday," he had said, "when I've made enough money to buy a ranch and settle down, I'm going to come back for you. That is, if you'd have a reformed gunslinger for a husband." Elena had laughed, thinking it was just the kind of romantic nonsense that men said when they were grateful for a woman's care. But Cole had been serious, deadly serious, and he had kissed her hand before riding away into the morning sun. That had been 7 years ago, and Elena had built a new life for herself in Tombstone Creek, eventually saving enough money to buy the Silver Dollar and create her own little empire. She had convinced herself that Cole Harrison was just a beautiful memory from her youth, a reminder of a time when anything had seemed possible. Now he was here in her saloon, and Elena didn't know whether to be thrilled or terrified. "Miss Elena?" The voice startled her from her reverie. She looked up to see Tom Bradley, one of her regular customers, standing at the bar with an empty glass. "Sorry, Tom," Elena said, reaching for the whiskey bottle. "My mind was elsewhere." Tom, a telegraph operator for the railroad, leaned closer and lowered his voice. "That stranger who was in here earlier, you might want to know that Sheriff Morrison's been asking questions about him." Elena's hand froze on the bottle. Sheriff Morrison was Jake the prospector's younger brother, an honest but sometimes overzealous lawman who took his job very seriously. "What kind of questions?" Elena asked carefully. "The kind that suggest Cole Harrison might not be as welcome in Tombstone Creek as he thinks," Tom replied. "Word is there's paper out on him from Texas. Something about a range war down in Laredo County." Elena's heart sank. She had hoped that Cole had found a way to leave his violent past behind, but it seemed that the past had a way of catching up with even the fastest guns. "Thanks for the warning, Tom," Elena said, refilling his glass. As Tom returned to his table, Elena made a decision that would change everything. She had saved Cole Harrison's life once before, and if necessary she would do it again. But first she needed to find out exactly what kind of trouble had followed him to Tombstone Creek. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with the desert sun painting the eastern mountains in shades of gold and pink. Elena had spent a restless night thinking about Cole's arrival and what it might mean, both for him and for her carefully ordered life in Tombstone Creek. She was arranging bottles behind the bar when Sheriff Morrison pushed through the batwing doors, his badge glinting in the morning light. At 35, Bill Morrison was a capable lawman who had brought order to Tombstone Creek through a combination of fairness and firmness. He was also, Elena knew, not a man to be easily fooled. "Morning, Elena," the sheriff said, touching the brim of his hat. "Mind if we have a word?" Elena continued her work, keeping her expression neutral. "Of course, Sheriff. What can I do for you?" Morrison approached the bar, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. The saloon was nearly empty at this early hour, with only a few early-rising miners nursing coffee at a corner table. "I understand you had a visitor yesterday," Morrison said without preamble. "Man named Cole Harrison." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady if she spoke too quickly. "You know who he is?" Morrison continued. "A customer who paid for his drinks and caused no trouble," Elena replied carefully. Sheriff Morrison's eyes sharpened. "Elena, I've known you for 3 years and I've never seen you lie to me. Please don't start now." Elena sighed and set down the bottle she had been holding. Bill Morrison was not only a good sheriff, he was also a good man who had always treated her with respect. She owed him honesty, even if she couldn't tell him everything. "I know he's a gunfighter," Elena admitted. "But like I said, he caused no trouble in my establishment." Morrison nodded slowly. "That may be, but I got a telegram from Marshal Henderson down in Laredo yesterday. Seems there's a warrant out for Cole Harrison in connection with a range war that left 6 men dead." Elena felt her heart skip a beat, but she kept her expression calm. "What kind of warrant?" Murder charges, Morrison said grimly. According to Henderson, Harrison was working for a cattle baron named Jameson who was trying to force small ranchers off their land. When the ranchers fought back, Harrison supposedly gunned down 6 of them in a single fight. Elena shook her head. The Cole Harrison she had known 7 years ago would never have killed innocent ranchers protecting their homes. There had to be more to the story. Have you considered that Marshal Henderson might not have all the facts? Elena asked. Morrison raised an eyebrow. You seem mighty concerned about a stranger, Elena. Elena realized she had revealed too much of her feelings and quickly attempted to recover. I just believe in fair treatment, Sheriff. This is still America, and a man is supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. That's true, Morrison agreed. But it's also true that Cole Harrison has a reputation as a hired gun. And in my experience, men like that don't usually end up in places like Tombstone Creek unless they're running from something. Elena couldn't argue with that logic, but she also couldn't abandon the man who had once promised to come back for her. What do you plan to do? Keep an eye on him, Morrison replied. If he really is innocent, he's got nothing to fear from me. But if he's here to cause trouble, I'll stop him before anyone gets hurt. The sheriff turned to leave, then paused at the door. Elena, I hope you understand that my job is to protect this town and everyone in it. That includes you. If Harrison is as dangerous as people say, you don't want to get mixed up with him. After Morrison left, Elena stood behind the bar feeling torn between her past and her present. She had built a good life in Tombstone Creek, earned the respect of the community, and created a successful business. Getting involved with Cole Harrison could jeopardize everything she had worked for. But she also couldn't forget the young man who had shared his dreams with her in that little general store in Salvation Falls, or the promise he had made before riding away into the sunrise. Elena's dilemma was interrupted by the arrival of her morning customers. Miners heading to work who stopped by for coffee and a shot of whiskey to fortify themselves for the day ahead. She served them with her usual efficiency, but her mind remained focused on Cole Harrison and the trouble that seemed to follow him like his own shadow. Around mid-morning, as Elena was reviewing her account books, she heard the distinctive jingle of spurs approaching the bar. She looked up to see Cole Harrison standing there, looking even more handsome in the morning light than he had the day before. "Morning, ma'am," he said politely. "Mind if I trouble you for some coffee?" Elena nodded and reached for the coffee pot, studying Cole's face as she poured. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept well, and there were new lines of worry around his gray eyes. "Sheriff Morrison was asking questions about you this morning," Elena said quietly, setting the cup in front of him. Cole's hand paused halfway to the coffee cup, but otherwise he showed no reaction. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that involve warrants from Texas," Elena replied. Cole closed his eyes briefly, then opened them and met Elena's gaze directly. "And what did you tell him?" "The truth, that you were a customer who caused no trouble." Cole studied her face intently. "Why would you protect a stranger?" Elena felt her heart racing. This was the moment she had been dreading and anticipating since yesterday afternoon. She could continue pretending they were strangers, or she could acknowledge the past they shared. "Because," Elena said softly, "we're not strangers, are we, Cole?" Cole's eyes widened in recognition, and Elena saw the exact moment when he realized who she was. 7 years had changed them both. Elena had grown from a young woman into a confident businesswoman, while Cole had acquired the hard edges that came with years of violence and survival. "Elena," he whispered, her name sounding like a prayer on his lips. "Elena Rodriguez from Salvation Falls." She nodded, unable to speak as a flood of memories and emotions washed over her. Cole reached across the bar and gently touched her hand. "I told you I'd come back for you," he said quietly. "You also told me you'd be a reformed gunslinger by then," Elena replied, fighting back tears. Cole's face grew dark with pain and regret. "Things didn't work out quite the way I planned." Elena closed the Silver Dollar early that afternoon, hanging a sign on the door that read, "Closed for inventory." She led Cole upstairs to her private rooms above the saloon, where they could talk without fear of being overheard. The rooms were comfortable and well-furnished, reflecting Elena's success and good taste. Lace curtains filtered the harsh desert sunlight, and the walls were decorated with paintings she had purchased from traveling artists. It was a far cry from the humble general store where they had first met. Cole stood awkwardly in the center of the main room, his hat in his hands, looking around at the evidence of Elena's prosperity. "You've done well for yourself," he said admiringly. "I worked hard," Elena replied, settling into a chair near the window. "Now tell me about Laredo. Tell me why Marshal Henderson thinks you murdered 6 ranchers." Cole sank into the chair across from her, suddenly looking much older than his 32 years. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of bitter experience. "The trouble started about 8 months ago," he began. "I was working as a deputy marshal in a little town called Cedar Ridge, trying to stay on the right side of the law like I promised you I would. The pay wasn't much, but it was honest work, and I figured I was finally building the kind of life that would let me come back for you." Elena felt a pang of guilt, knowing that while Cole had been thinking of her, she had been trying to forget him. A cattle baron named Marcus Jameson owned most of the good grazing land around Cedar Ridge, Cole continued. But there were still some small ranchers holding out on homestead claims, families who'd been there since before the big cattlemen arrived. Jameson wanted their land, and he wasn't particular about how he got it. "So he hired you to force them out?" Elena asked, dreading the answer. Cole shook his head emphatically. "No, Elena. I was hired to protect them." The small ranchers pooled their money and asked the county to send a lawman to help them stand up to Jameson's threats. Elena felt relief flood through her. The Cole Harrison she had known would never have terrorized innocent families. "What went wrong?" she asked. Cole's face darkened with painful memories. "Everything. Jameson had been hiring his own guns, hard men from down in Mexico who didn't ask questions as long as they got paid. When he realized the ranchers had legal protection, he decided to solve the problem permanently." Cole stood and walked to the window, staring out at the dusty main street of Tombstone Creek. They came at dawn on a Sunday morning when most folks were in church. 20 armed men, riding hard for the Henderson Ranch where the families had gathered for protection. Elena could hear the pain in Cole's voice and knew that what came next would be the heart of the tragedy. "I was outnumbered 20-1, Cole continued, but I couldn't let them slaughter innocent women and children. I took position in the ranch house and started shooting." "You fought 20 men by yourself?" Elena asked, awed by his courage. "The ranchers helped when they could," Cole replied. Old Pete Henderson was a crack shot with his hunting rifle, and his oldest son could handle a pistol. But most of the fighting fell to me. Cole turned from the window to face Elena, and she could see the haunted look in his gray eyes. When the smoke cleared, 6 of Jameson's men were dead, and the rest had run back to town with their tails between their legs. The ranchers and their families were safe. "Then why does Marshal Henderson want you for murder?" Elena asked, confused. Cole's laugh was bitter and without humor. "Because Marcus Jameson has money and influence, and the ranchers are just dirt farmers trying to scratch out a living. After the fight, Jameson claimed that I had ambushed his men while they were on a peaceful mission to serve eviction notices. He said the ranchers and I murdered 6 innocent cowboys." Elena felt sick to her stomach. "But surely people know the truth?" "Some do," Cole admitted. "But Jameson owns the local newspaper, half the businesses in town, and has the territorial governor's ear. His version of the story is the one that made it into the official report." "What about the ranchers? Didn't they testify on your behalf?" Cole's face grew even darker. "The Henderson Ranch burned down 3 nights after the fight, with Pete and his whole family inside. The other ranchers suddenly decided they didn't remember much about what really happened that Sunday morning." Elena gasped in horror. "Jameson killed them?" "Can't prove it," Cole replied grimly. "But Pete Henderson's barn was full of hay that shouldn't have caught fire on its own. And the surviving ranchers all received offers to sell their land for far more than it was worth, provided they left the county within a week." Elena began to understand the impossible situation Cole had found himself in. "So you ran. What choice did I have?" Cole asked. "Stay and face a rigged trial where the only witnesses who could clear me were either dead or bought off. I may be fast with a gun, Elena, but I'm not fast enough to outrun a hangman's rope." Elena stood and moved to where Cole was standing by the window. She reached out and took his hands in hers, feeling the calluses that came from years of handling weapons and working with horses. "So you came here," she said softly. Cole nodded. "I remembered your dream of running your own business, and I heard through the grapevine that there was a woman named Elena Rodriguez who owned a saloon in Tombstone Creek. I figured it was worth riding 700 miles to find out if it was the same Elena who saved my life in Salvation Falls." Elena felt tears welling up in her eyes. Despite everything that had happened, despite the years and the distance and the danger, Cole had kept his promise to come back for her. "What happens now?" she asked. Before Cole could answer, they heard the sound of multiple horses approaching the Silver Dollar at a gallop. Cole tensed immediately, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. Elena moved to the window and looked down at the street. Her blood turned to ice as she saw 6 heavily armed men dismounting in front of the saloon. They wore the kind of clothes and gear that marked them as professional gunmen, and their leader was a tall man with a cruel face and a silver-starred badge on his vest. "Cole," Elena whispered urgently, "I think your past just caught up with you." Cole joined Elena at the window and cursed under his breath as he recognized the man wearing the badge. "Jack Slade," he said grimly. "Jameson's pet bounty hunter. That badge he's wearing doesn't mean anything. He bought it from some corrupt sheriff down in Mexico." Elena counted 6 men total, all heavily armed and spreading out to cover both the front and back entrances to the saloon. "They're surrounding the building." Cole checked his Colt .45, making sure it was fully loaded. "Slade's not the type to take prisoners. Jameson must have put a dead or alive bounty on my head." "There has to be another way," Elena said desperately. "Maybe Sheriff Morrison can?" "No," Cole interrupted firmly. "This is my fight, Elena. I won't let you get hurt because of my troubles." From downstairs came the sound of the front door being kicked open, followed by the heavy tread of boots on the wooden floor. "Harrison," a harsh voice called out. "We know you're in there. Come down and face the music." Cole moved toward the stairs, but Elena grabbed his arm. "Wait," she whispered urgently. "I have an idea." Elena quickly explained her plan to Cole, who shook his head vigorously. "It's too dangerous. If something goes wrong." "Trust me," Elena said firmly. "You trusted me once before in Salvation Falls. Trust me again." Cole looked into her dark eyes and saw the same courage and determination that had impressed him 7 years ago. Reluctantly he nodded. Elena smoothed her dress and walked calmly down the stairs to the main floor of the saloon. The 6 bounty hunters had spread out among the tables and chairs, their weapons drawn. Jack Slade stood near the bar, a man in his 40s with cold blue eyes and a carefully waxed mustache. "Gentlemen," Elena said pleasantly, as if armed men broke into her establishment every day, "the saloon is closed for inventory. You'll need to come back this evening." Slade's laugh was ugly and menacing. "We're not here for drinks, lady. We're here for Cole Harrison, and we know he's upstairs with you." Elena raised an eyebrow and looked genuinely puzzled. "I'm afraid I don't know anyone by that name." "Don't play games with us," Slade snarled. "Half the town saw him come in here yesterday and he never came out." Elena shrugged elegantly. "Many men come into my establishment, Mr. Slade. Jack Slade, and I'm a duly appointed deputy marshal." Elena examined the badge pinned to Slade's vest with obvious skepticism. "That's interesting, Marshal Slade. What jurisdiction do you represent?" Slade's face reddened at her calm challenge to his authority. "I got papers from Texas giving me the right to bring in Cole Harrison, dead or alive." "Well then," Elena said smoothly, "perhaps you should show those papers to Sheriff Morrison. I'm sure he'll be very interested in seeing them." "Where's Harrison?" Slade demanded, losing patience with Elena's polite responses. Elena walked behind the bar and began polishing glasses with a calm that she didn't feel. "As I said, I don't know anyone by that name. But if you're looking for the gentleman who was here yesterday afternoon, he checked out of the hotel this morning and rode south toward Tucson." It was a carefully crafted lie, designed to send the bounty hunters in the wrong direction while buying Cole time to escape. Slade studied Elena's face, trying to determine if she was telling the truth. "You're lying." Elena met his gaze steadily. "I run an honest business, Mr. Slade. I have no reason to lie to a law enforcement officer." One of Slade's men, a nervous-looking gunman with twitchy eyes, spoke up. "Maybe we should search the place, Jack. He could be hiding upstairs." Elena set down her glass and fixed the man with a steely stare. "I'm afraid that would require a warrant, which I assume you don't have. This is private property, and I have rights under territorial law." Slade was growing increasingly frustrated with Elena's calm resistance. "Rights don't mean much when you're harboring a fugitive." "Even if I knew this Cole Harrison person," Elena said carefully, "which I don't, I hardly think a woman running a business alone would risk her livelihood to protect a dangerous criminal." It was exactly the right thing to say. Slade and his men relaxed slightly, their assumption being that a woman wouldn't have the courage or the foolishness to defy armed men to protect a stranger. "You said he rode toward Tucson?" Slade asked. Elena nodded. "Early this morning, just after sunrise. He seemed to be in quite a hurry." Slade exchanged glances with his men. Tucson was a day's hard ride to the south, and if Harrison had a several-hour head start, they would need to move quickly to catch him. "If we find out you're lying to us, lady," Slade warned, "we'll be back." Elena smiled sweetly. "Of course. And when you return, I'll be sure to have Sheriff Morrison here to examine your credentials properly." The mention of the local sheriff was enough to convince Slade that he had wasted enough time. He jerked his head toward the door, and his men began filing out of the saloon. "This ain't over," Slade said as he reached the batwing doors. Elena continued polishing glasses until she heard the sound of horses galloping away toward the south. Only then did she allow herself to relax, her hands shaking slightly as the full danger of what she had just done began to sink in. Cole appeared at the top of the stairs, his gun still in his hand. "Are they gone?" Elena nodded. "For now. But they'll be back when they realize I sent them on a wild goose chase." Cole came down the stairs and took Elena in his arms, holding her tightly. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," he whispered into her hair. Elena allowed herself to enjoy the feeling of being in Cole's strong arms for just a moment before pulling back. "We don't have much time. Slade will figure out he's been fooled by tomorrow evening at the latest." Cole nodded grimly. "I'll ride out tonight. Head up into the mountains where they can't track me." "No," Elena said firmly. "Running won't solve anything. Jameson and his bounty hunters will just keep chasing you until they run you to ground." "What else can I do?" Cole asked. "I can't prove my innocence from the grave." Elena's eyes lit up with sudden inspiration. "Maybe you can't prove your innocence, but what if we could prove Jameson's guilt?" That evening, after the Silver Dollar had closed to regular customers, Elena and Cole sat upstairs planning what might be the most dangerous gambit of their lives. Elena had sent word to Tom Bradley, the telegraph operator, asking him to come by for a private meeting. Tom arrived just after midnight, curious about Elena's mysterious summons. When he saw Cole Harrison sitting at Elena's table, his eyes widened with alarm. "Elena, what's going on here?" Tom asked nervously. Elena poured 3 glasses of her finest whiskey and gestured for Tom to sit down. "Tom, I need to ask you to do something that could be very dangerous. But first, let me tell you the truth about Cole Harrison." Over the next hour, Elena and Cole told Tom the real story of what had happened in Laredo County. They explained about the range war, the murdered ranchers, and Marcus Jameson's campaign to steal their land through violence and intimidation. Tom listened with growing amazement and outrage. As a telegraph operator, he had seen many messages pass through his office, and he had learned to read between the lines of official communications. "I remember some of those telegrams from down south," Tom said slowly. "There were a lot of messages about range wars and cattle disputes, but the official reports never mentioned anything about families being burned out of their homes." "That's because Jameson controls the flow of information," Cole explained. "He owns newspapers, judges, and politicians. The truth never makes it into the official records." Elena leaned forward eagerly. "Tom, you have access to the territorial telegraph network. Could you send some discreet inquiries to other operators in Texas and New Mexico? Maybe find people who were there and saw what really happened." Tom rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "It's possible. Telegraph operators talk to each other all the time, and we hear things that never make it into official messages. If there were witnesses to what really happened, I might be able to find them." "It's dangerous," Cole warned. "If Jameson finds out someone is investigating him, he'll send more than just bounty hunters." Tom Bradley was a quiet man who had lived his whole life avoiding trouble, but the story he had just heard stirred something deep inside him. The idea that innocent families had been murdered while corrupt officials covered up the truth offended his sense of justice. "I'll do it," Tom said firmly. "But it'll take time. Maybe a week or 2 to reach all my contacts and get responses." Elena felt a surge of hope. "How long before Slade realizes I sent him in the wrong direction?" Cole calculated quickly. "He'll reach Tucson tomorrow evening and start asking questions. When he doesn't find any trace of me, he'll know you lied to him. Figure 2 days before he's back here with blood in his eyes." "That's not enough time," Tom said worriedly. Elena stood and began pacing, her mind working furiously. "Then we need to buy more time. And I think I know how to do it." She turned to face Cole with a determined expression. "How do you feel about hiding in plain sight?" Cole raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" Elena's plan was audacious and risky, but it just might work. The next morning, she walked into Sheriff Morrison's office and requested a private meeting. "Sheriff," she said without preamble, "I have a proposition for you." Morrison looked up from his paperwork with interest. "What kind of proposition?" "The kind that might help you solve several problems at once," Elena replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. Elena had spent hours crafting her approach, knowing that she needed to appeal to Morrison's sense of justice while protecting Cole's true identity. "Sheriff, what if I told you that Cole Harrison isn't the villain that Marshal Henderson claims he is?" Morrison's eyes sharpened. "I'd say you know more about this than you let on yesterday." Elena nodded. "You're right. I do know Cole Harrison, and I believe he's innocent of the charges against him. Morrison leaned back in his chair. That's a serious claim, Elena. What evidence do you have? Elena chose her words carefully. What if Harrison was willing to turn himself in to you voluntarily, under the condition that he gets a fair hearing before being sent back to Texas? Why would he do that? Morrison asked suspiciously. Because, Elena said, he believes he can prove his innocence if he gets a chance to tell his side of the story to an honest lawman. Morrison studied Elena's face intently. And you believe he's innocent? I do, Elena said firmly. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally he spoke. If Harrison is willing to surrender voluntarily, I'll guarantee him a fair hearing. But Elena, if he's lying, if he really is a cold-blooded killer, I'll have to send him back to face those murder charges. Elena nodded. I understand. And Sheriff? There's something else you should know. Yesterday, 6 armed men broke into my saloon claiming to be bounty hunters with legal authority to arrest Harrison. Morrison's face darkened. What kind of men? Elena described Jack Slade and his crew in detail, emphasizing their threatening behavior and questionable credentials. That doesn't sound like any legal operation I've ever heard of, Morrison said grimly. Bounty hunting is legal, but breaking into private property isn't. I thought you should know, Elena said. In case they come back. An hour later, Elena returned to the Silver Dollar with Sheriff Morrison following at a discreet distance. She found Cole upstairs, cleaning his gun and preparing to leave town. Cole, she said urgently, I need you to do something that's going to sound crazy. She quickly explained her conversation with Sheriff Morrison and her plan to hide Cole in the local jail where Slade couldn't reach him. Cole stared at her in amazement. You want me to surrender to the local sheriff? Think about it, Elena argued. Slade is expecting to find you running. He'll never think to look for you in the town jail. And Morrison is an honest man who'll make sure you get a fair hearing. Elena, if this goes wrong? It won't, Elena said with more confidence than she felt. Trust me. Cole looked into her eyes and saw the same determination that had convinced him to share his story 7 years ago in Salvation Falls. Slowly he nodded. All right. But if Sheriff Morrison decides to ship me back to Texas without a hearing, I'm holding you responsible. Elena smiled. Fair enough. Sheriff Morrison was waiting downstairs, his hand resting casually on his gun but his expression calm and professional. When Cole appeared at the top of the stairs, the 2 men studied each other carefully. Mr. Harrison, Morrison said formally, Elena tells me you want to turn yourself in voluntarily. Cole walked down the stairs slowly, his hands visible and away from his weapons. That's right, Sheriff. I'm tired of running from charges I didn't earn. Morrison nodded approvingly. Cole's willingness to surrender voluntarily spoke well for his character, at least in the sheriff's eyes. I'll need your weapons, Morrison said. Cole carefully removed his gun belt and handed it over, along with a small knife he kept in his boot. Morrison examined the weapons professionally, noting the quality of the craftsmanship and the care with which they had been maintained. These are fine weapons, Morrison observed. The kind a professional would carry. I've been carrying guns for 15 years, Cole replied. I've learned to take care of my tools. Morrison holstered his own weapon, a sign that he didn't consider Cole an immediate threat. All right, Mr. Harrison. Let's go have that talk. As they prepared to leave the Silver Dollar, Elena caught Cole's eye and mouthed the words, trust me. Cole nodded almost imperceptibly, then followed Sheriff Morrison out into the bright Arizona sunshine. Elena watched from her window as the 2 men walked down the dusty street toward the sheriff's office. She could only hope that her desperate gamble would buy them enough time for Tom Bradley to find the evidence they needed to clear Cole's name. What she didn't know was that Jack Slade had not ridden south toward Tucson as she had hoped. Instead, the bounty hunter had sent his men south while he remained hidden in the hills outside Tombstone Creek, watching and waiting for Cole Harrison to make a mistake. Jack Slade crouched behind a boulder on the ridge overlooking Tombstone Creek, a brass spyglass pressed to his eye. He had been watching the town since dawn, and his patience had finally been rewarded. Through the lens, he could see Cole Harrison walking down Main Street with Sheriff Morrison, the 2 men engaged in what appeared to be serious conversation. Slade's lips curved into a cruel smile as he realized what was happening. Clever, he murmured to himself. Hide in the jail where the bounty hunters can't reach you. But Jack Slade hadn't earned his reputation by giving up when his quarry went to ground. He had been hunting dangerous men for over 10 years, and he had learned that there was always a way to flush out even the most clever prey. Slade collapsed his spyglass and made his way back to where he had hidden his horse. He needed to send a message to his men in Tucson, calling them back to Tombstone Creek. Then he would implement a plan that would force Cole Harrison out of his sanctuary one way or another. Meanwhile, in the sheriff's office, Cole was telling his story to Bill Morrison with the same careful honesty he had shown Elena. Morrison listened without interruption, occasionally making notes but mostly just absorbing the details of Cole's account. When Cole finished, Morrison leaned back in his chair and was quiet for several minutes, thinking over what he had heard. "It's a hell of a story," Morrison said finally. "If it's true you're not a murderer, you're a hero who saved innocent families from being slaughtered." "It's true," Cole said simply. "Every word of it." Morrison stood and walked to the window, looking out at the peaceful street scene. Tombstone Creek was the kind of town where people knew their neighbors and looked out for each other. The idea of corrupt cattlemen burning out families to steal their land was particularly offensive to him. "The problem," Morrison said, "is proving it. It's your word against Marcus Jameson's and he's got money and political connections." "I know," Cole admitted. "But Elena thinks she might be able to find witnesses who can back up my story." Morrison turned from the window with interest. "What kind of witnesses?" Cole explained Tom Bradley's plan to use the telegraph network to contact people who might have seen what really happened in Laredo County. Morrison nodded approvingly. "Tom's a good man," the sheriff said. "If anyone can track down the truth through those telegraph wires, it's him." Morrison made his decision. "All right, Harrison. I'm going to hold you here on the federal warrant, but I'm not sending you back to Texas until we've had a chance to investigate your story properly." Cole felt a surge of relief. "Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate the fair treatment." "Don't thank me yet," Morrison warned. "If your story doesn't check out, I'll have no choice but to turn you over to the federal marshals." As Morrison was locking Cole into one of the jail's 2 cells, Tom Bradley burst through the front door, his face flushed with excitement and alarm. "Sheriff," Tom gasped, trying to catch his breath. "I've got news about those bounty hunters." Morrison turned from the cell, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. "What kind of news?" Tom held up a telegram form, his hands shaking slightly. "I've been monitoring the telegraph traffic and I picked up some messages between Jack Slade and his men. They're not bounty hunters at all, they're hired killers working directly for Marcus Jameson." Morrison took the telegram and read it quickly, his face growing darker with each line. The message was brief but damning. "Harrison in jail, stop, kill him, and anyone who helped him stop, make it look like escape attempt, stop, no witnesses, stop Jameson." Cole gripped the bars of his cell, his face pale. "Elena. They're going to go after Elena." Morrison was already strapping on his gun belt. "Tom, how long ago was this message sent?" Tom checked his records. "About an hour ago. And Sheriff, there's more. I intercepted responses from Slade's men. They're riding back from Tucson right now. They'll be here by nightfall." Morrison cursed under his breath. 6 professional killers against 1 small-town sheriff were not good odds, especially when they had orders to kill witnesses. "Sheriff," Cole said urgently, "you have to let me out of here. Elena's in danger because she helped me." Morrison shook his head. "I can't do that, Harrison. If I let you go and you disappear, I'll never know if your story was true. Then we'll all be dead and it won't matter." Cole snapped, his frustration boiling over. Morrison studied Cole's face, seeing genuine concern for Elena rather than self-preservation. It was another point in favor of Cole's character. "All right," Morrison said finally. "Here's what we're going to do." The sheriff's plan was risky, but it was their only chance. Morrison would deputize Tom Bradley and position him at the telegraph office, where he could monitor communications and summon help from neighboring towns if necessary. Morrison himself would stay at the jail with Cole, but he would unlock the cell so Cole could help defend the building when Slade and his men attacked. "You realize I'm trusting you with my life," Morrison told Cole as he turned the key in the cell door. "I won't let you down," Cole promised, checking his guns as Morrison returned his weapons. But even as they prepared for the coming fight, all 3 men knew that their real concern was for Elena. The Silver Dollar Saloon, with its wooden construction and multiple entrances, would be almost impossible to defend against 6 determined killers. "I have to get to Elena," Cole said, moving toward the door. Morrison blocked his path. "If you leave this building, Slade will know we're working together. Elena's best protection right now is for Slade to think you're still locked up and helpless." Cole wanted to argue, but he could see the logic in Morrison's reasoning. Still, every instinct he had screamed at him to go to Elena's side. "She's tougher than you think," Morrison said, reading Cole's expression. "Elena Rodriguez didn't build that business from nothing by being helpless. She can take care of herself until we deal with Slade. Cole nodded reluctantly, knowing that Morrison was right but hating every minute of inaction. As the sun began to set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, the three men settled in to wait for the attack they knew was coming. None of them realized that Elena had already seen the danger approaching and was preparing her own desperate defense. Elena had watched from her window as Tom Bradley ran frantically toward the sheriff's office, and she had seen the grim expressions on the faces of several townspeople who had been talking in hushed groups on the street. Something was happening, and her instincts told her it had to do with Cole and the bounty hunters. As the afternoon wore on, Elena noticed that Tombstone Creek seemed to be holding its breath. Children were called inside earlier than usual, and she saw several men checking their weapons before disappearing into their homes. Whatever was coming, the town sensed it. Elena made her own preparations. She closed the Silver Dollar early again, but this time she barricaded the front door and checked the locks on all the windows. From her father's old trunk, she retrieved a double-barreled shotgun and a Winchester rifle that she had hoped never to use. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old, explaining that a woman alone on the frontier needed to be able to protect herself. Elena had always been a good shot, but she had never imagined she might have to use those skills to defend her own business. As the sun began to set, Elena heard the sound of multiple horses approaching from the north. She crept to a second-floor window and peered out through a gap in the curtains, her heart sinking as she saw 6 heavily armed men dismounting in front of the Silver Dollar. Jack Slade stood in the middle of the group, his silver badge glinting in the dying light. Elena could see that these men were different from the ones who had confronted her the day before. There was a cold professionalism about them that spoke of violence and death. "Elena Rodriguez," Slade called out, his voice carrying clearly in the still desert air. "We need to have a conversation." Elena remained silent, hoping they would assume she wasn't in the building. "We know you're in there," Slade continued. "And we know you helped Cole Harrison. You can come out and talk to us, or we can come in and get you." Still Elena made no response, her hands tightening on the shotgun. Slade nodded to his men, and Elena watched in growing alarm as they spread out to surround the building. These weren't men who intended to take prisoners. "Last chance," Slade shouted. "Come out now and we'll make it quick." Elena's blood turned to ice as she realized what Slade was really saying. They weren't here to question her. They were here to kill her. Marcus Jameson had decided to eliminate everyone who could testify against him. The first shot shattered the window of the saloon's main room, sending glass flying across the floor. Elena dropped to her knees behind the solid oak bar as more bullets began punching through the wooden walls. "Burn it down," she heard Slade yell. "Make sure she doesn't get out." Elena's heart pounded as she realized the full extent of her danger. If they set fire to the building, she would be trapped upstairs with no way to escape. She had to act quickly. Crawling on her hands and knees, Elena made her way to the front window and carefully peered over the sill. One of Slade's men was approaching the building with a burning torch, clearly intending to set the wooden structure ablaze. Elena raised her rifle, took careful aim, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the evening air, and the man with the torch spun around and fell, the burning brand flying from his hand to land harmlessly in the dirt. "She's armed," one of the gunmen yelled unnecessarily. Elena quickly moved to another window as bullets began concentrating on her previous position. The Winchester rifle held 15 rounds, and she intended to make each one count. From her new position, she could see another of Slade's men trying to circle around to the back of the building. Elena led him slightly, as her father had taught her when hunting deer, and fired. The man stumbled and went down, clutching his shoulder. "Two down," Elena whispered to herself, trying to stay calm despite the deadly situation. But even as she scored hits on Slade's men, Elena knew she was fighting a losing battle. They had her surrounded, and sooner or later they would find a way into the building. Her only hope was that Cole and Sheriff Morrison would realize what was happening and come to her aid. What Elena didn't know was that Cole was indeed trying to reach her. At the sheriff's office, the sound of gunfire had galvanized all three men into action. "That's coming from the Silver Dollar," Tom Bradley said, his face pale with worry. Cole was already moving toward the door, but Sheriff Morrison grabbed his arm. "Wait. If we go charging over there, we'll be walking into an ambush. Elena's fighting for her life," Cole snarled, trying to pull free. "And she'll die for sure if we get ourselves killed trying to help her," Morrison replied grimly. "We need a plan." Morrison quickly outlined his strategy. Tom would create a distraction by setting off some dynamite at the old mine works on the edge of town, drawing some of Slade's men away from the saloon. Meanwhile, Morrison and Cole would approach the Silver Dollar from opposite directions, catching the remaining gunmen in a crossfire. "It's risky," Morrison admitted, "but it's the best chance we have of saving Elena without getting her killed in the process." Cole wanted to argue, but he could see the wisdom in Morrison's approach. A frontal assault would likely result in Elena's death, along with their own. "All right," Cole agreed reluctantly. "But we move fast. Elena can't hold them off forever." As Tom Bradley ran toward the mine works with a stick of dynamite in his hand, Cole and Morrison split up and began working their way through the darkened streets of Tombstone Creek toward the besieged saloon. At the Silver Dollar, Elena was running low on ammunition and growing increasingly desperate. She had wounded 2 more of Slade's men, but the others had learned to respect her marksmanship and were being more cautious in their approach. "Elena Rodriguez," Slade called out again. "You're only making this harder on yourself. Surrender now and I promise you a clean death." Elena's response was another rifle shot that sent Slade diving for cover behind a water trough. "Stubborn bitch," Slade muttered. "All right boys, we do this the hard way." Elena heard the sound of glass breaking at the back of the building and realized that someone had found another way in. She grabbed her shotgun and moved toward the rear staircase, knowing that the final confrontation was about to begin. The explosion at the mine works lit up the night sky like a miniature sunrise, sending rocks and debris flying in all directions. Tom Bradley had done his job well. The blast was loud enough to wake the dead and impressive enough to suggest that something significant was happening on the other side of town. As Morrison had hoped, 2 of Slade's men immediately mounted their horses and rode toward the explosion, leaving only 4 gunmen to continue the assault on the Silver Dollar. Cole used the distraction to work his way closer to the saloon, moving through the shadows between buildings with the stealth that had kept him alive through years of dangerous situations. He could see muzzle flashes from inside the building and knew that Elena was still fighting, though her rate of fire had slowed considerably. Sheriff Morrison approached from the opposite direction, his Winchester rifle ready for action. The 2 men had arranged to coordinate their attack when the town clock struck 9, and Cole could see the clock face clearly from his position behind the blacksmith's shop. Inside the Silver Dollar, Elena faced her worst nightmare as she heard footsteps on the rear staircase. Someone had indeed broken into the building and was climbing toward her private rooms. She positioned herself at the top of the stairs, her shotgun aimed at the landing below. The first man to appear was one of Slade's gunmen, a thin man with nervous eyes who held his pistol ready. Elena didn't hesitate. At close range, the shotgun was devastatingly effective, and the gunman crumpled without firing a shot. But Elena's victory was short-lived. Even as the first attacker fell, she could hear more men entering the building below. They had her trapped upstairs with no way to escape. "Elena," a familiar voice called from the street. "Stay down. Help is coming." Cole's voice gave Elena new hope, but it also revealed his position to Slade and his remaining men. Almost immediately, gunfire erupted in the street as the bounty hunters tried to pin down Cole behind the blacksmith's shop. The town clock began to chime 9 o'clock and Cole made his move. Rolling out from behind the shop, he came up firing, his Colt .45 spitting flame in the darkness. One of Slade's men spun around and fell, his rifle clattering across the wooden sidewalk. At the same moment, Sheriff Morrison opened fire from his position near the general store, catching another gunman in a deadly crossfire. The man tried to run but didn't make it 3 steps before Morrison's Winchester brought him down. That left only Jack Slade and 1 other gunman still in the fight, but they had taken cover inside the Silver Dollar, where Elena was trapped upstairs. "Harrison," Slade yelled from inside the building. "I've got your lady friend up here. You want her to live, you'll throw down your gun and surrender." Cole's blood turned to ice as he realized that Slade had somehow reached Elena's rooms. He started toward the saloon, but Sheriff Morrison's voice stopped him. "It's a trap, Cole. He's trying to draw you into the building where he can kill you both." Cole knew Morrison was right, but he also couldn't abandon Elena to Slade's mercy. As he wrestled with his options, Elena made the choice for him. From the second floor of the Silver Dollar came the sound of another shotgun blast, followed by a man's scream and the crash of furniture being overturned. Then Elena's voice rang out clearly in the night air. "Cole, I'm all right. The back stairs." Elena had used the remaining barrel of her shotgun to discourage Slade's last gunman from pursuing her up the stairs. Now she was barricaded in her bedroom, but she wouldn't be able to hold out much longer. Cole made his decision. Ignoring Morrison's shouted warnings, he sprinted across the street toward the Silver Dollar, knowing that every second counted. If Slade managed to break through Elena's barricade, she would be defenseless. Cole burst through the rear door of the saloon and immediately dove to one side as Jack Slade's pistol roared in the darkness. The bullet splintered the doorframe where Cole's head had been a split second before. "You should have stayed in jail, Harrison," Slade snarled from somewhere in the darkness of the saloon's main room. Cole rolled behind the bar, the same solid oak structure that had protected Elena earlier in the fight. "It's over, Slade. Your men are dead and Sheriff Morrison has the whole town alerted. Surrender now and maybe you'll live to see trial." Slade's laugh was harsh and without humor. "I don't think so, Harrison. Jameson pays me too well to quit now." Cole heard the sound of footsteps moving toward the stairs and realized that Slade was trying to reach Elena while keeping Cole pinned down behind the bar. There was only one way to stop him. Cole vaulted over the bar and charged across the room, firing as he ran. Slade's return fire went wide in his surprise at Cole's desperate gambit, and before he could recover, Cole was on him. The two men crashed into a table, scattering chairs and sending an oil lamp flying. The lamp shattered against the wall, and burning oil began to spread across the wooden floor. Cole and Slade rolled across the floor, each trying to gain control of the other's gun. Slade was a tough, experienced fighter, but Cole had the advantage of desperation. Elena's life hung in the balance. Cole managed to slam Slade's gun hand against the floor, and the pistol went skittering away into the darkness. Slade responded by driving his knee into Cole's stomach, doubling him over with pain. As the two men fought, the fire from the broken lamp was spreading rapidly across the dry wooden floor. Soon the entire saloon would be engulfed in flames. Slade broke free from Cole's grip and lunged for his fallen pistol, but Cole tackled him from behind, sending both men crashing into the bar. Bottles of whiskey shattered around them, adding fuel to the growing fire. Sheriff Morrison burst through the front door, his rifle ready, but he couldn't get a clear shot at Slade without risking hitting Cole. The two men were locked in a deadly struggle, rolling back and forth across the burning floor. "Elena," Morrison shouted toward the stairs. "You need to get out of here. The building's on fire." From upstairs came the sound of a window being forced open, and Morrison saw Elena climbing out onto the roof of the building's rear extension. She was safe for the moment, but the fire was spreading rapidly, and soon the entire structure would be consumed. Cole finally managed to get his hands around Slade's throat, but the bounty hunter was far from finished. Slade pulled a hidden knife from his boot and drove it toward Cole's chest. Cole caught Slade's wrist just inches from his heart, and the two men strained against each other, the knife blade trembling between them. The fire was getting closer and smoke was beginning to fill the room. With a surge of desperate strength, Cole twisted Slade's wrist until the bounty hunter screamed and dropped the knife. Then Cole's fist connected with Slade's jaw and the man went limp. Cole staggered to his feet, coughing from the smoke that was now filling the saloon. The fire was spreading too quickly. In minutes, the entire building would be an inferno. Sheriff Morrison grabbed Cole's arm and pulled him toward the door. "Come on. We have to get out of here." Cole looked down at the unconscious Jack Slade, knowing that the man would burn to death if left behind. Despite everything Slade had done, Cole couldn't bring himself to leave any man to die in a fire. "Help me get him out of here," Cole said, grabbing Slade under the arms. Morrison shook his head in amazement at Cole's mercy, but he helped drag the unconscious bounty hunter toward the door. Behind them, the flames roared higher as the Silver Dollar Saloon was consumed by fire. Outside in the street, Elena watched her life's work burning, tears streaming down her face. She had lost everything she had built, but she was alive and Cole was safe. Under the circumstances, that seemed like a miracle. Cole emerged from the burning building carrying Jack Slade, with Sheriff Morrison close behind. Both men were blackened by smoke and singed by flames, but they were alive. Cole dropped the unconscious Slade in the dirt and ran to where Elena stood watching the fire. Without a word, he took her in his arms and held her tight, both of them shaking from the aftershock of their narrow escape. "I thought I'd lost you," Cole whispered into Elena's hair. "Never," Elena replied fiercely. "We've come too far to lose each other now." Sheriff Morrison stood guard over the unconscious Jack Slade while the volunteer fire brigade attempted to save what they could of the Silver Dollar. It was too late to save the building, but they managed to prevent the fire from spreading to neighboring structures. As dawn broke over Tombstone Creek, the Silver Dollar Saloon was nothing but smoldering ruins. But Elena Rodriguez and Cole Harrison were alive, and their love had survived its greatest test. The real test, however, was still to come. Jack Slade was awakening, and when he did, he would face charges for attempted murder and arson. More importantly, Tom Bradley's telegraph investigation was beginning to bear fruit, and the evidence he was gathering might finally clear Cole's name and expose Marcus Jameson's crimes. 3 days after the fire, Tombstone Creek buzzed with excitement as telegrams arrived from across the Southwest Territory. Tom Bradley had outdone himself, using his network of telegraph operators to track down witnesses and evidence that painted a very different picture of the Laredo County Range War. Sheriff Morrison's office had become the unofficial headquarters for the investigation, with Tom's telegraph key clicking constantly as new information arrived from Texas, New Mexico, and even as far away as Colorado. Cole sat in the sheriff's office, no longer a prisoner but not yet a free man, as Morrison read the latest batch of telegrams. Elena sat beside him, her hand in his, both of them anxiously waiting to learn if the evidence would be enough to clear Cole's name. Jack Slade occupied the jail's other cell, his face heavily bandaged from his fight with Cole and his attitude considerably less arrogant than it had been before the fire. He had been charged with attempted murder, arson, and impersonating a federal officer, charges that could see him hanged if convicted. "Well," Sheriff Morrison said finally, looking up from the pile of telegrams, "this is quite a story." Tom Bradley leaned forward eagerly. "What did you find?" Morrison organized the telegrams into neat piles as he spoke. According to a telegraph operator in Santa Fe, there were 3 newspaper reporters who covered the Henderson Ranch incident. All 3 filed stories claiming that Cole Harrison was a hero who saved innocent families from being massacred. Elena squeezed Cole's hand tightly. "What happened to those stories?" "They were never published," Morrison continued. "The newspaper editors received orders from their publishers to kill the stories. Apparently, Marcus Jameson has financial interests in several newspapers throughout the territory." Tom pulled out his notebook and began writing furiously. "There's more, Sheriff. Tell them about the railroad investigator." Morrison nodded and picked up another telegram. "A man named Joseph Fletcher works as an investigator for the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, happened to be in Laredo County during the Range War. He filed an official report with the railroad describing the incident at the Henderson Ranch." "What did his report say?" Cole asked. Morrison read directly from the telegram. "Observed armed attack on Henderson Ranch by approximately 20 men employed by cattle baron Marcus Jameson. Attack repelled by single deputy marshal and ranch defenders. Marshal Harrison's actions prevented massacre of women and children. Recommend commendation for exceptional bravery under fire." Elena felt tears of relief welling up in her eyes. After years of running and hiding, Cole finally had witnesses to back up his story. But Morrison wasn't finished. "There's also this," he said, holding up another telegram. "From a doctor in El Paso who treated one of Jameson's wounded gunmen after the fight." Morrison read the telegram aloud. "Patient admitted with gunshot wound claimed to be innocent cowboy attacked while serving legal papers. When examined, patient had burns on hands consistent with handling torches or setting fires. Also found carrying ammunition and weapons far exceeding needs of legitimate ranch work. Suspected patient involved in raid rather than legal proceedings." Cole felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that he had carried for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. "Is it enough?" he asked. Sheriff Morrison set down the telegrams and leaned back in his chair. "It's enough for me. And more importantly, it's enough for a federal judge to dismiss the charges against you." Elena threw her arms around Cole's neck, unable to contain her joy any longer. After 7 years of separation and weeks of danger, Cole Harrison was finally free. But their celebration was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. The office door opened and a well-dressed man with a federal marshal's badge stepped inside. "Sheriff Morrison?" the man said. "I'm Marshal Robert Carlyle, sent by the territorial governor to investigate the situation here." Morrison stood and shook hands with the federal marshal. "Marshal Carlyle. We weren't expecting any federal involvement." Carlyle smiled grimly. "You weren't supposed to. But when word reached Santa Fe that bounty hunters were operating with fake federal warrants, the governor decided to send someone to sort out the mess." The marshal's eyes fell on Jack Slade, who was glaring at him from behind the bars of his cell. "Mr. Slade, I presume? You've caused quite a stir with your unauthorized activities." Slade remained silent, but his face had gone pale at the sight of a real federal marshal. Marshal Carlyle turned to Cole. "Mr. Harrison, I've reviewed the evidence that Mr. Bradley here has compiled through his telegraph investigation. I'm prepared to drop all federal charges against you immediately." Cole stood slowly, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Just like that?" "Just like that," Carlyle confirmed. "The evidence clearly shows that you were acting in your capacity as a duly appointed deputy marshal when you defended the Henderson Ranch. The charges against you were based on false testimony and manufactured evidence." Carlyle pulled out an official-looking document and handed it to Cole. This is a federal pardon, signed by the territorial governor himself. You're a free man, Mr. Harrison. Elena read the document over Cole's shoulder, tears of joy streaming down her face. After all they had been through, Cole was finally vindicated. But Marshal Carlyle wasn't finished with his revelations. He turned to face Jack Slade's cell, his expression growing hard. Mr. Slade, you and your associates have been operating under false federal authority. But more seriously, we have evidence that you were involved in the murder of the Henderson family. Slade's composure finally cracked. You can't prove anything. Carlyle smiled coldly. Actually, we can. One of your men survived his wounds from the fight here in Tombstone Creek. He's been very talkative about Marcus Jameson's operations, including the order to burn out the Henderson ranch with the family inside. Elena gasped in horror, and Cole's hand moved instinctively toward his gun. The idea that the family who had helped him fight off Jameson's raiders had been murdered in retaliation made his blood boil. In fact, Carlyle continued, we have warrants for Marcus Jameson and 12 of his associates on charges of murder, conspiracy, and violation of federal homestead laws. It seems Mr. Jameson's land-grabbing operation was far more extensive than anyone realized. Sheriff Morrison whistled low. 12 men. That's quite an organization. It was, Carlyle agreed. But it's been rolled up completely. Jameson tried to flee to Mexico when he learned about the investigation, but federal marshals arrested him at the border yesterday. Cole felt a sense of justice and closure that he hadn't experienced in years. The man responsible for so much death and suffering was finally going to pay for his crimes. What about the other ranchers? Elena asked. The ones who were forced to sell their land? The federal government is reviewing all land transactions involving Marcus Jameson's company, Carlyle explained. Families who were forced to sell under duress will have their property restored, and they'll receive compensation for their losses. Tom Bradley looked up from his notebook, where he had been frantically recording everything the marshal said. This is going to be front-page news in every paper in the territory. Carlyle nodded. Good. People need to know that the federal government won't tolerate this kind of corruption and violence. As the marshal prepared to leave, taking Jack Slade with him to face federal charges, Cole realized that his long nightmare was finally over. He was free, vindicated, and standing beside the woman he loved. What happens now? Elena asked as they watched Marshal Carlyle's wagon disappear down the dusty street. Cole looked at the ruins of the Silver Dollar Saloon, then at Elena's face. She had lost everything to help him, and he was determined to make sure she didn't regret that sacrifice. Now, Cole said, taking her hands in his, we rebuild. Together. Elena smiled through her tears. It won't be easy. I lost everything in that fire. No, Cole corrected gently. You lost a building. Everything that really matters is still right here. Sheriff Morrison cleared his throat diplomatically. If you two are planning to rebuild the Silver Dollar, you might be interested to know that the town council has been talking about offering low-interest loans to help businesses recover from disasters. Elena's eyes lit up with interest. What kind of loans? The kind that would let you rebuild bigger and better than before, Morrison replied with a smile. The Silver Dollar was the heart of this town, Elena. We want it back. Cole squeezed Elena's hands. What do you say? Ready to build our future together? Elena looked into Cole's steel-gray eyes and saw all the love and hope that had sustained them through 7 years of separation and weeks of danger. She also saw something new, peace. The haunted look that had marked Cole as a man running from his past was gone, replaced by the quiet confidence of a man who had found his place in the world. Yes, Elena said simply. Let's build something beautiful. 6 months later, on a warm spring morning in 1883, the new Silver Dollar Saloon opened its doors for business. The building was larger than the original, with a beautiful mahogany bar that Cole had ordered from San Francisco and elegant fixtures that reflected Elena's refined taste. But the most significant change wasn't in the building itself. It was in the sign that hung above the front door. Instead of Silver Dollar Saloon, it now read Harrison's Silver Dollar Saloon and Restaurant, Cole and Elena Harrison, proprietors. Elena Harrison stood behind the new bar, polishing glasses and watching her husband as he supervised the final touches on their restaurant section. They had been married in a simple ceremony 3 months after the fire, with Sheriff Morrison serving as best man and half the town of Tombstone Creek in attendance. The marriage had been the fulfillment of a promise made 7 years earlier in a small general store in Salvation Falls, but it was also the beginning of something entirely new. Elena was no longer just the saloon queen of Tombstone Creek. She was a partner in a business that served the finest food and drink in the Arizona Territory. Cole had invested his savings from his years as a lawman and gunfighter into the new establishment, but more importantly, he had invested his future. The Colt .45 that had been his constant companion for 15 years now hung over the bar as a decoration, a reminder of the past but no longer a tool of his trade. "Mrs. Harrison," Tom Bradley called out as he entered the saloon, "you've got a telegram." Elena took the telegram from Tom with interest. They had been receiving messages of congratulation from all over the territory as word spread about their new business. But this telegram was different. It was from Pete Henderson Jr., the sole survivor of the ranch family that had helped Cole fight off Jameson's raiders. Elena read the message aloud. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, words cannot express my gratitude for your courage in exposing the truth about what happened to my family. The federal government has restored our ranch, and I am rebuilding with the compensation money. I would be honored if you would accept this small token of appreciation for everything you have done." Attached to the telegram was a bank draft for $500, a substantial sum that represented Pete Henderson's gratitude for Cole's heroism and Elena's determination to clear his name. Cole looked at the bank draft with amazement. "He doesn't owe us anything. We were just doing what was right." "That's exactly why he wants to help," Elena replied. "Good people stick together out here." Sheriff Morrison entered the saloon, admiring the improvements they had made. "Place looks fantastic," he said, settling onto a stool at the bar. "You two have really built something special here." Elena poured Morrison his usual whiskey, noting with satisfaction how the amber liquid caught the light from their new crystal glasses. "We've had a lot of help from our friends." Indeed they had. The people of Tombstone Creek had rallied around Cole and Elena, offering labor, materials, and expertise to help them rebuild. The new Silver Dollar was as much a community effort as it was a private business. "Any word from Marshal Carlisle about the trials?" Cole asked. Morrison nodded grimly. "Jameson and his associates all received lengthy prison sentences. Jack Slade got 15 years for his part in the conspiracy. Justice was finally served." Elena felt a sense of satisfaction at the news. The men who had terrorized innocent families and tried to kill her and Cole were finally paying for their crimes. "You know," Morrison continued, "the territorial governor was so impressed with how you two handled yourselves during this whole affair that he's offered Cole a position as a federal marshal." Cole looked up from the table he was polishing, surprise written on his face. "A federal marshal?" "Think about it," Morrison said. "You've got the experience, the skills, and now you've got a reputation for integrity. The territory needs good lawmen who can't be bought or intimidated." Elena watched her husband's face carefully, knowing that he was torn between his desire to leave his violent past behind and his natural instinct to protect innocent people. "What do you think?" Cole asked Elena. Elena considered the offer carefully. She knew that Cole would never be truly happy unless he felt he was making a difference in the world. Running a saloon was rewarding work, but it wasn't the kind of calling that would satisfy a man of Cole's character in the long run. "I think," Elena said slowly, "that you should do whatever makes you feel like you're living up to your potential." Cole smiled at his wife's wisdom. "What if I said yes to the marshal position, but only if I could be based here in Tombstone Creek? That way I could help keep the peace in this part of the territory while still helping you run the business." Morrison grinned. "I think that could be arranged. The governor specifically mentioned that he wanted you working in an area where you had community ties." Elena felt excitement building in her chest. The idea of Cole serving as a federal marshal while they continued to build their business together appealed to her sense of justice and adventure. "There's one condition," Cole said, looking at Elena seriously. "If I take this job, there might be times when I have to travel, times when there could be danger. I need to know you're comfortable with that." Elena reached across the bar and took Cole's hand. "I fell in love with a man who risked his life to protect innocent people," she said firmly. "I wouldn't want you to change now." Cole lifted Elena's hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Then I guess Arizona Territory has a new federal marshal." Tom Bradley, who had been listening to the conversation with growing excitement, pulled out his notebook. "This is going to make a great story for the territorial newspapers. The Gunslinger Who Became a Marshal, a love story of the American West." Elena laughed. "Just make sure you spell our names right." As the afternoon wore on and the Silver Dollar filled with customers, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 7 years ago, she had been a young woman with dreams of independence and adventure. Today she was a successful businesswoman, a loving wife, and the partner of a man who would help bring justice to the frontier. The West was changing slowly but surely. Towns like Tombstone Creek were becoming more civilized, and the rule of law was gradually replacing the rule of the gun. But there was still work to be done, still innocent people who needed protection from those who would prey on the weak. Cole Harrison had found his calling as a lawman, but more importantly, he had found his home with Elena. Together, they would help build the kind of society where families could live in peace and honest people could pursue their dreams without fear. As the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Elena looked out at the thriving community of Tombstone Creek and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had come west looking for adventure and independence, and she had found both. But more than that, she had found love. Not just romantic love, but love for a community, love for a way of life, and love for the endless possibilities that the American frontier represented. 1 year later, the Harrison Silver Dollar had become famous throughout the Arizona territory. Travelers would go out of their way to stop in Tombstone Creek, drawn by stories of the saloon where a brave woman had faced down armed killers and a reformed gunslinger had found redemption. Elena stood on the balcony of their second-floor living quarters, watching the sunset paint the desert mountains in shades of purple and gold. In her arms, she held their 3-month-old son, James Cole Harrison, named for both his father and his grandfather. Cole emerged from the saloon below, having finished his evening rounds as the local federal marshal. The badge on his chest caught the last rays of sunlight, a symbol of how far he had come from his days as a hired gun. "How are my two favorite people?" Cole asked, climbing the stairs to join his family on the balcony. "Perfect," Elena replied, leaning against her husband's strong shoulder. "Absolutely perfect." Cole took his son in his arms, marveling at how something so small could represent such hope for the future. James Cole Harrison would grow up in a world where justice was stronger than corruption, where love was more powerful than hate. "Tom Bradley stopped by earlier," Elena said. "He's finished his book about our story." Cole raised an eyebrow. "Our story?" Elena smiled. "He's calling it The Saloon Queen Who Hid a Gunslinger's Secret. He thinks it'll be published by a company back east." Cole laughed. "I'm not sure I like being called a secret." "You were my secret," Elena said softly. "For 7 years I carried the memory of a young man who promised to come back for me. I never told anyone about that promise because I was afraid it was too good to be true." Cole kissed his wife's forehead gently. "Some promises are worth keeping no matter how long it takes." As they stood together on the balcony, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky, Elena thought about all the people whose lives had been touched by their story. Pete Henderson Jr. had rebuilt his family's ranch and was now married with a family of his own. Several of the other ranchers who had been driven from their land by Marcus Jameson had returned and were prospering once again. Tom Bradley had become something of a celebrity, his Telegraph investigation having exposed corruption throughout the territorial government. He was now the official correspondent for 3 major newspapers, covering stories of justice and redemption throughout the American West. Sheriff Morrison had been elected mayor of Tombstone Creek, his fair and honest leadership having helped the town grow into one of the most prosperous communities in the territory. Even Jack Slade, serving his 15-year sentence in the territorial prison, had reportedly found religion and was teaching other inmates to read and write. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't saved my life in Salvation Falls?" Cole asked. Elena considered the question seriously. "I think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be." Cole nodded, knowing that Elena was right. Their love had survived 7 years of separation, weeks of mortal danger, and the challenges of building a new life together. It was the kind of love that created legends. "Speaking of meant to be," Cole said with a smile, "I have something for you." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Elena's eyes widened with curiosity. They were already married, so it couldn't be an engagement ring. "What is it?" she asked. "Open it," Cole replied. Inside the box was a beautiful silver pendant in the shape of a star, with a small diamond at its center. Engraved on the back were the words, "To Elena, the star that guided me home. All my love, Cole." Elena felt tears welling up in her eyes as Cole fastened the necklace around her neck. "It's beautiful. I wanted you to have something that would remind you of how much you mean to me," Cole said. "Not just as my wife, but as the woman who saw something worth saving in a lost young man." Elena touched the star pendant at her throat, feeling its warmth against her skin. "You weren't lost, Cole. You were just taking the long way home." As the night deepened around them, the small family stood together on their balcony, looking out at the growing town that had become their home. Tombstone Creek was thriving, its streets busy with honest commerce and its people living without fear. The Wild West was slowly giving way to a more civilized society, but there would always be a place for people of courage and integrity. Cole Harrison had found his place as a lawman and community leader, while Elena Harrison had become a successful businesswoman and the unofficial First Lady of Tombstone Creek. Their story had become part of the legend of the American West, a tale of love, redemption, and the power of ordinary people to stand up for what was right. It was a story that would be told and retold for generations, inspiring others to believe that no matter how dark the circumstances, there was always hope for a better tomorrow. Years later, when historians wrote about the settlement of the Arizona Territory, they would mention the Harrison Silver Dollar as one of the establishments that helped bring civilization to the frontier. They would write about Cole Harrison, the gunslinger turned federal marshal who helped clean up corruption in the territorial government. But most of all, they would write about Elena Rodriguez Harrison, the saloon queen who risked everything to protect the man she loved and in doing so became a symbol of the strength and courage that built the American West. The Silver Dollar Saloon still stands in Tombstone Creek today, now preserved as a historical landmark. Visitors can see the mahogany bar that Cole imported from San Francisco, the crystal glasses that Elena chose with such care, and the Colt .45 that hangs above the bar as a reminder of a more dangerous time. But the real legacy of Cole and Elena Harrison isn't found in any building or artifact. It lives on in the values they embodied: courage in the face of danger, loyalty to those we love, and the belief that ordinary people can make an extraordinary difference when they stand up for what's right. Their love story became part of the mythology of the American West, proof that even in the hardest and most dangerous times, love could conquer all. It was a story that gave hope to countless people who believed that somewhere out there, their own true love was waiting to be found. And perhaps most importantly, it was a story that reminded everyone who heard it that the West was won not just by guns and gold, but by the courage of people who were willing to risk everything for the chance at a better life. The saloon queen who hid a gunslinger's secret had become something more than either of them could have imagined. She had become a legend that would inspire generations of Americans to believe in the power of love, courage, and redemption. In the end, that may be the greatest treasure of all.